I'm going to go over some visual motor assessments. The first up is the Beery Visual Motor Integration, age range 2 to 18 years old. It has 3 different subtests: the visual motor integration, visual perceptual, and motor coordination. Visual motor integration is copying designs. Visual perceptual is finding designs. So this one you're not using motor, you're just finding which design looks like the stimulus. And then motor coordination is drawing within lines. Now the DTVP, or Developmental Test of Visual Perceptual 2, has 2 versions. The regular, which is age 4 to 10, and then the adolescent adult, which is 11 to 74. So just kind of keep in mind, it covers a good amount of the age span with both versions. And then I am going to go in a bit of detail about the subtest here, just to kind of give a little bit more of an explanation. So the first one here is spatial relations. So this subtest is actually going to measure the ability to connect dots in order to reproduce a visually presented pattern. So what does that look like? Right here. So they're going to have to connect those dots in order to kind of make that design that's up at the top. And then for figure ground, this one, it's going to measure the ability to see a certain figure even when it's hidden within a confusing or complex background. So that one, an example of that one is this. So they have to find the shapes at the top and the bottom. Next up is visual closure. So this one's measuring the ability to recognize a stimulus when it is incompletely drawn. Looks like what it sounds like. They're going to look at this. The bottom middle one's not all the way drawn out. That's the one though. Form constancy. Form constancy is the ability to match 2 figures that vary on one or more discriminating features. This means it might be a different size and a different position or space. So this one looks like this for the DTVP. So for instance, you'll tell them 2 of the shapes at the bottom match the one at the top. Can you find the 2 shapes? By the way, for all of the subtests of the DTVP, you are reading from a script. So it is a standardized assessment. So just keep that in mind. It's very scripted, the whole thing. The next one is eye-hand coordination. This one's the ability to draw precise straight or curved lines in accordance with the boundaries. So this one's kind of like the one on the VMI, where you have to stay within the lines. It just looks a little different. This one's more like mazes and things of that nature. So you got to stay within the boundaries of that one. And then we have copying. Copying, again, is the one like the VMI. It's going to measure the ability to recognize the features of a design and draw it from a model. So this one's going to look like this. So they're going to see the shape and then draw it themselves at the bottom. Moving on to position in space. This one measures the ability to match 2 figures according to their common features. So for instance, here you see the arrow pointing up. You have to find that same arrow on the other side. So you have to match it with common features. And then last up is visual motor speed. So this one's actually going to measure the ability or how fast the child is able to make a certain mark inside of a certain design. So that pretty much looks like this. So you see each one has a certain mark or it doesn't, and they have to reproduce this model here on the bottom. All right. Then we have the Preschool VMI or the PVMIA. The age range is 3.5 to 5.5. And this one has 2 subtests. So the subtests are here at the bottom. They have a drawing subtest and a block pattern subtest. These subtests are going to look at these various different areas of assessment. So they're going to look at the child's spatial relations, their perception in space, color and space discrimination, ability to match 2 attributes simultaneously, and the ability to reproduce what's seen and interpreted. So for instance, let me kind of explain how these work. On the block pattern subtest, you're going to use some, instead of using the 1-inch cubes that are used a lot of times, like in the Peabody, you're going to use the little parquetry blocks. And you're going to do, for example, you're going to lay out all the blocks, and you're going to say, you're going to pick one up and say, find this block. So a visual of that to kind of help understand it would be right here. Find this block. So you pick up a yellow diamond and you ask them to find that, and then they pick up a yellow diamond. So that's, color and shape discrimination. Then you might pull out a paper design and say, put your shape in, make it look like my shape. So then that works on their ability to position the shape correctly, position in space. You also could do a design, I don't know how well that shows up, with no color. And then that works on strictly just shape discrimination. You can build on top of shapes. So then they have to match the shape in that way. So it's kind of just addressing a lot of these different areas too through these 2 subtests. There's not much information online about the drawing subtest. What I do know about it is it works on or assesses the child's ability to recognize and reproduce lines in shape. Next is the Erhardt Developmental Vision Assessment, or EDVA. It is going to be for a population of 0 to 6 months, so infants. And pretty much it's a behavior rating scale that's used to determine visual motor development. So how well the vision and motor system are working together. Unlike the previous ones over here, the VMI, DTVP, and the Preschool VMI, it is not so much looking at your writing, more so looking at the muscles of the eye and the involuntary and voluntary visual patterns that I have listed here. So I'm going to kind of just go into some detail about what these are. So we'll start with involuntary visual patterns. The first one is eyelid reflexes. So pretty much when you think of this, you can think of the blink reflex, also known as the corneal reflex. So what this is involuntary blinking of both eyes that is elicited by stimulation of the cornea. So when you touch the cornea, both eyes are going to blink in response. Damage to the trigeminal and facial nerve are going to cause absence of this reflex. Not really going to go into much detail about trigeminal versus facial. Well, I can touch on it. Damage to the trigeminal nerve means that both eyes may lose the blink reflex. Damage to the facial nerve could mean just one eye, the opposite eye might lose it. So if the damage to the left facial nerve, the right eye would then blink. So just kind of touched on that a little bit. Moving on to the pupillary reactions. So there's a few of these type of conditions. So one of the basic ones, meiosis. So when you shine a light into your eye, you should see pupillary restriction or constriction, where the pupil gets smaller in response to light. Mydriasis, pupillary dilation. When you are in dim light, the pupil will dilate or become larger. Some of the conditions associated with damage to the pupillary reactions may be Horner syndrome, which you'd see ptosis and miosis, meaning eye drooping or eyelid drooping, and meiosis is pupil constriction. Accommodation issues where they have difficulty focusing on objects that are close up, and consensual light reflex. So this one has to do with cranial nerve 2 or optic nerve and cranial nerve 3, ocular motor nerve injuries. This is where the light in one eye, so you shine light in one eye, this is supposed to result in constriction of both eyes. So if I shine light in this eye, it's normal to get constriction of both of my eyes, right? If this reflex is absent, you're not going to see that. And that's, again, I'm not going to go into detail about optic versus ocular motor, but just know that those two are involved. Then we're moving on to the last one that's under involuntary visual patterns, and this one is the doll's eye phenomenon. So when the head is turned from side to side, the eyes stay fixed in a mid position. So when I turn my head, I don't know if you can really even see it, my eyes move. If I had doll's eye phenomenon, when I turn my head, my eyes would stay right here. So they would stay looking without turning from side to side. So that's what that is. This is a vestibulo-ocular reflex. And when doll's eye phenomenon is present, this is actually an indication that there's been damage to the brainstem. So you might see this in really bad TBIs. All right, let's move on to some of the voluntary visual patterns. So first up, we have fixation. This is just when the eyes are able to remain fixed on an object for a duration of time. In the EDVA, how this might be tested for infants under 6 months, so 0 to 6, you might use black and white patterns. And the reason you would use black and white is because, remember, color and depth perception really kind of start to develop well around 3 to 4 months. So, if you're using this for a 2-month-old, you may want to use the black and white pattern suggested, and you're just going to hold them so that you can see that they can fixate on that stimulus. Then we have localization. This one, you can just use a rattle to have them localized to the sound. So if you, for instance, shake the rattle over here and they look over here, they're not able to localize to the sound that's coming from this side. Ocular pursuits, so you may use cars or a doll or something of that nature, and pretty much you're going to move it from one side to the other side. You want to see if they can visually track that object across midline and all the way to the other side with nice smooth pursuits. And then gaze shift. So this one is a little bit confusing to me, but it says this can be stimulated by alternating internal movement between 2 or more targets, for instance, using finger puppets. So the way that I kind of think of it is to be able to shift your attention from here. So if they're using a finger puppet and they have it here and you've focused on it and then they shift it, you have to shift your gaze and refocus, realign your eyes onto that object. Alrighty, now we're going to look at the TVMS, or the test of visual motor skills. Do note that this one has 2 versions. The TVMS, good for ages 2 to 13, and the TVMS UL, or test of visual motor skills upper level, for ages 12 to 40 years old. And this assessment is going to look at eye-hand coordination skills in order to copy geometric designs. This test looks a lot like the Beery-VMI. So I'll kind of give you a visual just so you can see. So you're going to get a figure, and the child is going to have to copy that figure in the space provided below. Really, the difference is for this one, the VMI is kind of in nice, neat little boxes. This one is one page at a time. So it kind of gets rid of any visual distractions and just has the one figure that they then have to reproduce. So that's what that looks like. And that's another one there. But you're kind of looking at the same things that you do in the VMI, the angles, the accuracy of shape, things of that nature. Alrighty, now we're moving on to visual perceptual assessments, no motor. So before we did visual motor assessments, now we're doing visual perceptual. Alrighty, first up is the TVPS. We just talked about the TVMs, the test of visual motor skills. Now this is the test of visual perceptual skills. So all of the subtests here have nothing to do with motor coordination. It's all about visual perceptual. The age range is 4 to 19. And the subtests are visual discrimination, visual memory, spatial relations, figure ground, visual closure, form constancy, and sequential memory. You'll see here that I actually have the last two, form constancy and sequential memory. I have them kind of starred. That's because they're unique to the TVPS, but they're not in the MVPT. So just, their minuses here, stars here, because this has the two added on. Also, just to note about age range, TVPS is 4 to 19. The TVMs was 2 to 13. So kind of interesting. The motor started a little earlier and ended earlier. The perceptual starts a little later, ends a little later. Alrighty. So I'm just going to show some examples of what this looks like. For instance, first up, visual discrimination. It's your basic visual perceptual, find how it's different. Next is visual memory. All right, and that one is, they're just going to show you a figure and then flip to the next page and you have to find that figure. Very standard. Spatial relations. This here. Something to note about spatial relations is it's actually the ability to orient one's body in space and to perceive the position of objects in relation to oneself and to objects, which essentially just means when you're looking at the figure, are they able to figure out how one image is positioned differently from another image? So for instance, the swirly on the end is turned upside down. The spatial relations are off. Alrighty, next is figure ground, your typical figure ground. Find an image within an image. And then visual closure, typical. The images on the bottom are not quite complete. Which one matches the most closely to the one on top? Form constancy. Is this one here. And then last up, sequential memory. You're going to show them an image prior, and they have to try to find which of these has the same sequential order as the one that you showed them prior to. All right, so that's the TVPS, non-motor compared to the TVMs. Then we're moving on to the MVPT, or the motor visual perceptual test. This one is age 4 to 95, so well into good age, you can do this one. it's going to look at the same stuff as TVPS with the exception of no form constancy and no sequential memory. The tests look pretty much the same between the two of them. It's all done in the same kind of way. Something to notice though about the MVPT is there's an MVPT-V, which stands for vertical, and this is actually used on populations with visual deficits, such as hemifield visual neglect and abnormal visual saccades. Now, just as a review, because we're here, I just want to talk a little bit about hemifield visual neglect. Now, this happens commonly when the right side of the cerebral hemisphere of the brain is damaged, and it's characterized by reduced awareness of the stimuli on one side of space, even though there may not be sensory loss. Do remember, okay, so let's say I damage the side of my brain and now I neglect the entire left hemisphere, okay? So I don't even acknowledge things that are on the left side. I only acknowledge things on the right side. There's no sensory usually involved. It's just what I'm acknowledging. This is very different from hemianopia, which is I can't see it. I physically can't see what is on that side. This, they can see it. It's like it's not even there. They neglect it. Just wanted to remind you of that.